And hello everyone, bom dia or good morning from my part of the world. I'm really happy to be your moderator for today and also really happy to be with great speakers today, and let me introduce them to you. So we have with us Mario Piacentini, who is a senior analyst at the Program for International Student Assessment, Pisa, of the Education and Skills Directorate at OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, where he's responsible for extending Pisa to new assessment domains. Mario is the lead author of the framework for the Pisa 2018 assessment of global competence and is now managing the development of the new Pisa assessment of creative thinking. We also have with us Darla Diedorf. Dr. Darla is the executive director of the Association of International Education Administrators, that is a national professional organization based on the US. She's also a research scholar with the Social Science Research Institute at Duke University. And in addition, she also teaches both at Duke and numerous other universities in the US and speaks on her research on intercultural competence and international education assessment in events worldwide. And among her numerous publications is her work as editor of the Sage Handbook of Intercultural Competence. And we also have with us another type of doctor today, Carla Bolivar Quintero, who is a medical doctor. She's graduated from University of Zulia in Venezuela, and she's currently residing in Chile, where she works as a primary care physician and working for the past months in the front line of the COVID-19 crisis, where she puts her global skills into practice on her day-to-day. She is also an alumna of an AFS high school study abroad program from Venezuela to Germany. Because of her work, Carla is at the hospital right now, so she can't be with us live in this morning session of the webinar. She'll be with us in the evening US time, but she has gently given her some of her time and recorded a video last night with us, so her part will be shared via a video testimonial. And we also want to get to know who's with us today before we get started as well. And you're going to see on your screen right now, before we dive into our agenda, two polls. The first question is around your primary area of work, and you can choose one of these options that is most aligned to describe the work you do, either as a secondary level school teacher or administrator, working with higher education, universities, college, either as faculty, administrator, as researcher in a government education body, on student exchange or study abroad organizations, on more general intercultural education and training, and other. And in case it's other, please share it on the chat with us. And in case you cannot see the poll, feel free to share those via the chat as well. Once you answer this one, if you scroll down, you're going to see the next question there as well, which is around the primary reasons for attending this webinar. And you can answer both at the same time. The second question is around, as I mentioned, the primary reason for attending the webinar, and you have a couple of options there. And here you can choose more than one option. For example, to learn more about global competence and 21st century skills during and after COVID-19, to learn about Pisa's Global Competence Assessment and Framework. Perhaps you're seeking for an online community to share practices on these topics during COVID-19, for general professional development or other. So we'll give a couple of more seconds for everyone to fill this in. And I see some people are sharing on the chat with us as well. We also have a general physician with us. Wonderful. Very diverse group as well. Okay, we're ending the poll right now since we got most of the answers, and let's see the results. And for those on Workplace, AFSers, feel free to type on the chat and comments as well. Unfortunately, you cannot see the poll there. So you must be seeing on your screen now the results from the poll on Zoom. So most, 34%, it's very divided, but are in intercultural education and training, mostly in other that have shared with us through the chat as well, and some on student exchange abroad, researchers, higher education and secondary level. And most The primary reason for attending the webinar is around learning more about global competence and 21st century skills during and after COVID-19, which is great because we are going to be covering all of these topics today. Hazar, if you move to the next slide, we can share our agenda for the day. So first, we're going to start a bit of framing the subject on why we're talking about global competence now. Then we're going to hear Carla's testimonial about global competence in COVID-19 response frontline. Then Mario is going to walk us through Pisa's Global Competence Assessment approach. Darla is going to share with us some observations from the global education field. And then I'm going to share with you some best practices from AFS, what has been AFS's response to COVID-19 crisis. And then finally, we're going to have time for questions and discussion. As you might have noticed, and Hazar mentioned at the beginning, those joining via Zoom, you are muted. So at the end, during Q&A, you will have the opportunity of using the raise hand feature to unmute yourselves and ask questions as well. But feel free to type them on the Q&A or the chat throughout the presentation so we can capture them and address them at the end. So let's get started. And as I mentioned, let's begin looking into what does the current crisis suggest about the need for global competence and other 21st century skills. So in a nutshell, what the current crisis is showing is that global competence and other 21st century skills are no longer optional. And all of us have been experiencing these changes in our everyday life due to the new coronavirus. In a very micro level, this has required us to spend much more or all of the time at home, working from home. For those who have children, perhaps homeschooling as well. For some of us to postpone or even cancel travel plans, either they are for leisure, for work, or study abroad. And maybe the only trip we are planning nowadays, and very carefully, is the one to a grocery store. And in a more macro level, things are changing and adapting in accelerating rates, and we are all faced with much uncertainty. And in order to navigate these times, global competence and other 21st century skills are more relevant than ever. And for example, being able to cope with rapid changes and adapt quickly to new realities, for us to think critically about the very amount of information we are receiving and really establishing an informed opinion, for using a we instead of me approach in the sense of appreciating how anyone's individual actions have an impact on our collective well-being, and also embracing differences, really as strengths, with each of us bringing to the table one part of an answer that can only be solved by all of us pulling our talents and resources together. So these are some examples of why we believe that global competence is no longer optional. And to get us started with a very practical example, we're going to listen to Carla. And as I mentioned, she's not able to join us live this AM. So we recorded this video with her, where she's going to share with us a little bit about her story as a global citizen, her work on the front lines of COVID-19 pandemic in Chile, and how global competence helps her in her day-to-day, especially during this time of crisis.
Well, thank you, Carol, and hello, everyone. My name is Carla Bolivar Quintero. I work as a primary care physician in Santiago, Chile, and I was a 2009 AFS alumna. I went from Venezuela to Germany. I decided to start a journey when I was 16 years old and decided to go to Germany and start a new adventure without understanding very much of what was I going to expect. And the learning that I gained there was by far one of the most incredible years of my life. I had the chance to interact with new cultures, with people from all over the world, to learn about them, to become more aware of my surroundings, to have more tolerance, more empathy toward people who are not necessarily the same as me or come from the same place as me. Back after my year, I went back to Venezuela, my home country, and I decided to start studying medicine. That was basically the reason why I left Germany. And was one of the most incredible experiences. Also, my years in university, I have the chance to cooperate, to be surrounded with amazing people who today are working also in this pandemic. And after that, I started working a year in Venezuela, but definitely the situations and the conditions surrounding the political environment made me to have to migrate to a new country, which is now Chile, and where I have been for the past 2 years, and where I have to definitely put to test my abilities and put to test all this learning that I have all the years before that. I had to use new resources to be more resilient with the new conditions that I was living through. And all up to that point has led me to this day. Now I have the chance to work as I said before, as a primary care physician, and now facing this pandemic. This pandemic has definitely not been the easiest time for us, especially here now in Chile. We are just starting to see the worst case scenario that already many countries has faced before. Working every single day, just seeing suspected patients, visiting positive patients already, and just trying to help them through all this time, understanding that in Chile we have this situation where people come from different places in Latin America. Many of them don't even speak Spanish. They have different cultural backgrounds as well, and social conditions that are very different to the ones that I was used to. And I have to start using some of the tools that I have used before. I have to ask myself, how could I provide the best care to these people, to these patients, not only when it comes to science, but also when it comes to treating and helping them in the best way I could to understand the situation that we're going through. Many of them are now unemployed. Many of them are struggling day to day to provide their families with, and they're also scared, as we all and the team and the medical team and the health team that I work with are also scared, because we all are afraid to just, of course, getting sick and not being able to provide to our families as well. Many of my colleagues haven't seen their kids for almost 3 months already. And this day to day, obviously, just need from the best of us, need from us that we start to work with people, understand people, try to be more to apply more empathy with them, to be more tolerant with them, and to, of course, be more flexible and use some adaptability to the new situations and this new normality that we are going through. Definitely my year in Venezuela, in Germany, has helped me a lot. My 2 years in Chile has obviously been fundamental in all of this. And I guess that what my message here is that we all need to have some responsibilities in this situation. We all obviously tired, we are all going through hard times, and the best way to go all over this is just to work together as a team, to understand the situations that people are going through, to try to help them in the best way we can, and just trying to stay safe, stay home, understand that this problem, as many problems, are probably going to pass, but the best way to go through all of this is we work together, of course. Just this week has been terribly hard on us and on my team, my colleagues. I'm just working around the clock, seeing patients. We see more than 30 patients a day. Personally, I see more than 30 patients every single day. We do more than 50 tests a day. In Chile, we are talking about more than 4,000 infected people every single day. We are now seeing the overcrowded healthcare system that was seen in Europe in the past months. And definitely the best way we can do this is if we do share and if we do our part and help people to go over this the best way we can. So thank you very much. Thank you, AFS, for the opportunity, for inviting me to provide with my testimony and to just share a little bit of what it feels like to work on the front line. So thank you, everyone.
We're really thankful to Carla for finding the time on her very busy schedule to share this testimonial with us. Quite powerful. And now that we have seen a very practical example about the key role global competence plays to help us navigate these challenging times, I'd like to hand over to Mario, who's going to present to us Pisa's definition of global competence and how this has been measured with students in education systems worldwide. Mario, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carol, for the opportunity of speaking today and presenting our approach for the Pisa assessment of global competence. I'm very glad to be here and speaking with all of you and meeting you at distance. I'm going to go quite fast through the conceptual framework and to the assessment approach, but you are very welcome to ask me any question during this webinar, and I would also be pleased to answer to any question you might have over the following days. We have a lot to learn about global competence and how it is applied in the real world. So we are very eager to connect with you. So starting with the definition of global competence in Pisa, global competence is a multidimensional construct, and we define with our experts 4 main dimensions that define a globally competent student. The first dimension it's called examine local, global, and intercultural issues, and refers to the ability to effectively combining knowledge and critical reasoning in order to establish an informed opinion on a global or an intercultural issues. This, of course, requires the development of cognitive skills, such as selecting and evaluating evidence, as well as media literacy. The second dimension of global competence is understand and appreciate the perspective and worldviews of others, and refers to students' willingness and capabilities to recognize that perspectives and behavior, including their own behaviors, are shaped by various influences, and that others might have views of the world that are profoundly different from their own. The third dimension of global competence is engage in open, appropriate, and effective interactions across culture. And this refers to the way, of course, people interact with others. And an individual who is globally competent can demonstrate sensitivity towards others and the willingness to engage with other perspectives. They're able to make themselves understood, and they also make efforts to understand others. The fourth and final dimension of this complex thing, that is global competence, is more oriented towards what globally competent individuals actually do in their real life every day. It focuses on individuals' role as active and responsible members of society, and on their engagement to take action for collective well-being and sustainable development. So global competence is a multidimensional construct. It's a lifelong learning construct. Like, you never stop learning global competence. You never stop. You never achieve the maximum possible level of global competence. And it's supported across all its 4 dimensions by 4 distinct yet interrelated building blocks. And these are knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values. For example, if we take the first dimension, examine local, global, and intercultural issues, this development in these dimensions requires knowledge of a wide set of issues, the skill to transform awareness into deeper understanding, and also the attitudes and values to reflect and deeply engage with the issues from multiple perspectives. Let's now move to discussing a bit the assessment approach in Pisa. In Pisa, we have developed one assessment approach that is tailored to the complexity of such a large-scale international project. It's one approach that has a specific purpose. It doesn't replace other types of assessment that should happen, that should be managed by educators in the classroom. We have two main instruments for this assessment, and I'm going to explain you the differences between these two instruments. The first one is a cognitive test, in which students need to answer to a set of questions that verify their understanding of a situation presented in a scenario. And the second instrument of the test is a questionnaire, in which students are asked to report to what extent a series of statements reflect what they know and how they behave. So let's start by explaining how the cognitive test works. The students sit on the test for about 1 hour and are presented with 3 or 4 different scenarios that describe one particular global or intercultural issues. You can think of a scenario as a story that can take the form of an extract from a newspaper or a conversation between fictional people. For example, like to contextualize today's conversation, a scenario can introduce 2 individuals who are debating whether the shutdown of the economy is or is not a good response to the global pandemic. And the scenario might provide information on these people, where they are from, who they represent. And the test might ask students to reflect on the debate and demonstrate their understanding of the matter and the perspectives of the 2 debaters. So there will be multiple questions associated with these scenarios. Students can either, for some questions are open, so students respond with open writing. Some questions are multiple choice. And how do we make sense of these responses? We can move to the next slide, please. You know that Pisa is mostly known for rankings, but ranking countries on a table is not the primary focus of this specific assessment. It's not really what we care about. What we want to do is to establish where students in different countries are along a continuum over multiple dimensions of development. And we will do this through rubrics. For example, for the cognitive process of identifying and analyzing perspective, we will, on the basis of student responses to the test, we will be able to establish whether the student has a basic, an intermediate, or an advanced level of development in this dimension. And in the framework, we provide descriptions of what these different levels imply. Next slide, please. The second core instrument of the test is a questionnaire. As I said, we have the questionnaire works as a series of statements, and we are asking the student to report whether these statements reflect what they know or what they are. For example, we are asking questions about their familiarity with a series of global issues, such as climate change or global health. The test was running for 2018. We expect that students' knowledge of global health has improved a lot over the last months. So our data will not be 100% timely, but hopefully, if we are able to repeat this test in the future, we will be able to assess how people like awareness of global issues evolve. And the questionnaire will cover a wider set of constructs that are pretty much all things that Carla mentioned in her video, things like adaptability, the importance of respecting people from other culture, the attitude of global mindedness or caring for others, no matter where they are, self-efficacy regarding addressing global issues, students' engagement, and then we have a rich set of questions on learning activities that students undertake at school and also out of schools. Because essentially at the heart of this project is really understanding how education can be transformed in order to promote global competence. So our data will provide some insights that can inform pedagogies. Next slide, please. And we already know something about what works for nurturing global competence at school. We know that, for example, what schools and teachers do are organizing discussions around like topics in the news, structured debates in which students argue in support or in opposition to a certain point of view, and of course all the pedagogies that are about students working together and realizing together some project work. And those things that really have a difference also as a life experience for the students are those activities that connect with the community where students live, such as service learning activities. In general, global competence requires a shift in the role of the teacher from the teacher as a mere transmitter of knowledge and information to the teacher as an organizer and a facilitator of a process of knowledge creation in the classroom. And it also requires a shift in the role of the student himself that needs to acquire greater responsibility over its learning process. Next slide, please. So, and this shift is from being just there in the classroom to receive knowledge and memorize stuff to active participation, and this capacity and courage to ask questions and to take responsibility, to engage with others and collaborate and realize and really develop new knowledge through discussions and collaborative work. One question that I always get is how many countries participated in the 2018 assessment? As I said, we had two instruments. One is the cognitive assessment, the scenarios with the questions, and the other one is the questionnaire, the different statements. And we have very good coverage in terms of countries for the questionnaire. And as you have seen, the questionnaire covers many interesting aspects of students' knowledge, attitudes, and skills. So it's going to be a very rich set of information from many countries. Unfortunately, a much lower number of countries decided to take the cognitive test for multiple reasons, including the fact that the development time that we had for this test was a bit shortened with respect to the Pisa standards, and some countries were not fully confident about the test, and also about the capacity that we had as a group of developers with many researchers, many collaborators, to develop questions that are really fair internationally. I think all of you can understand the complexity of checking students' understanding of global issues when it's always complicated to define what a global issue is, and what people know and what they can understand is deeply shaped by their context and by their origin. So there were concerns about fairness. Okay. So this is all I had to say. I hope it gave you a quick overview of our work. As I said, there will be more information coming on the reporting of this data next October, but I would really close as I started by inviting you to connect with us and share your ideas and give us a better understanding of what works in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, for this very comprehensive presentation. And for those who have any questions for Mario, you can already post them on the Q&A. I see we have one there already, or in the chat as well, and we will address them at the last part of the webinar. And for those who are interested in learning more about the results, as Mario mentioned, the worldwide results of Pisa 2018 Global Competence Assessment will be launched in October. And that will take place in a joint event by AFS and the OECD, the AFS Global Conference, which will take place virtually this October. I'll give more information about that at the end. But now I would like to invite to our virtual stage, Darla, to share with us some of her impressions and observations from the global education field. Darla?
Sure. Thanks so much, Carol. And before I start, we have a polling question for you. So we would love your input on how important do you think intercultural and global competence will be in the post-pandemic future? And you see several options there, and we would love to get your input into looking into the future in regard to this topic. And I want to thank Mario so much for sharing with us about the Pisa Global Competence. And I was honored and had the pleasure to work with Mario on that Pisa Global Competence. So we spent many long hours talking about all the complexities of what was involved with that. And we're all going to be excited to hear about the results coming in October. So thanks so much, Mario, for sharing about that. It's always interesting for me to hear kind of how that is shared out to others and what questions that all the rest of you might have about it. Okay, so Carol, our results from that. Oh, well, of course, I'm very happy to see the results of this, that 96% of you feel like that intercultural and global competence will be very important in the post-pandemic future. And a smaller number think it'll be somewhat important. So I realize we have a biased group here today, but really glad to see that. Thank you so much for your input. And so as most of you may know, and I'm just going to share some thoughts with you now. I appreciate the invitation to do so. So thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you today. I work primarily in the higher education sector. And as you already may know, there are many different terms for this construct that we're talking about. OECD uses global competence. I've been working with the United Nations. They use intercultural competences. A lot of it depends on the discipline and on the context. And there are over 30 different terms used to describe this concept. And so my research over the last decade, I tend to use the term intercultural competence, and increasingly using kind of both intercultural and global competence combined. I've been doing a lot of work also with the World Council on intercultural and global competence. And so we've been looking at how this manifests itself worldwide in lots of different contexts beyond higher education. And within the higher education context, we're seeing a few pieces emerge now. I'm sure you're seeing this as well with the pandemic. There is a huge concern about the increasing xenophobia that is occurring, and the discrimination and prejudice, particularly toward Asian, those who look like they're from Asia. And I'm really glad that AFS will be addressing this topic, from what I understand, in the next webinar. And so I think that's really important for all of us who are doing this work to really try to be aware of and do the best we can to help address this increasing xenophobia. Within higher education specifically, and I've been involved on a number of different webinars over the last weeks, there's a lot of talk around virtual exchange, because as you know, so much of the physical educational exchange, both at the secondary and post-secondary level, is not happening now for obvious reasons. And I know that the virtual exchange brings with it a lot of angst about what will happen then to the actual educational exchange that we are so used to. And I want to make a few comments about that. First of all, the virtual exchange and the physical mobility exchanges are viewed as two different tools. They are not obviously viewed as the same. And furthermore, virtual exchange is not a substitute for actual physical mobility and educational exchange. That being said, there's still a lot of learning that can obviously occur in both of those contexts and with both of those tools. Second, intercultural learning must be intentionally addressed in both of these tools. That intercultural competence just doesn't magically happen, whether we're putting students on airplanes and sending them abroad, in person and in a host country, or it also doesn't magically happen if we're just connecting people online. That we really must be very intentional about naming intercultural competence as a desired learning goal, and then breaking it down into specific learning outcomes. And in the end, it's still about a focus on the learning outcomes. What is it that we want students to achieve, whether through mobility and physical exchange or through virtual exchange? And then I know there are a lot of questions around assessment. That's another area I've done a lot of research and work on with assessing intercultural and global competence. And in the end, it's still about a focus on the learning outcomes, on determining what evidence needs to be collected to show that those learning outcomes have been achieved, looking at the best ways to collect that evidence, and then using that evidence for feedback to learners. So that assessment piece, regardless of the context and whether we're using virtual or physical exchange, that's still, those principles are still really important to follow. When we look at key tenets of intercultural competence that are becoming crucial now in the time of COVID-19, and I so much appreciate Carla's sharing from the front lines, and she really highlighted what was absolutely key, and she mentioned the empathy piece, really important. So increasingly, five tenets around intercultural competence are becoming increasingly crucial right now. The first is listening. The second is empathy, as Carla demonstrated. The third is curiosity. The fourth is respect. And the fifth is flexibility. And of course, we can certainly have a discussion about others that you feel might be important during this time as well. But those are key tenets within intercultural competence that are particularly crucial now. And I want to highlight especially listening and empathy. With listening, as humans, we typically listen for response, or we listen for judgment. What is my opinion of what you're saying? And right now, and always, we need to move more to a mindset of listening for understanding, of really focusing on the other person and what they're saying and how they're saying it. Because when we're listening for response or listening for judgment, the focus is more on ourselves. And we really need to turn our focus to the other and really practice listening for understanding. And I'll come back to that at the end because I'm excited to share with you a recent development along those lines. Empathy, and particularly intercultural empathy, is really becoming key from at all levels, from the highest levels of government down to grassroots level. And how do we demonstrate that intercultural empathy with others and understanding their background and their context and where they're coming from and what they're going through? Because in the end, this intercultural empathy is really what matters in building good relationships and in achieving smoother intercultural communication. So that focus becomes key, and healthcare has focused on this intercultural empathy all along. And now it's time for the rest of us to really make that a priority. So coming back to what Mario shared with the OECD Pisa, and I was very grateful to be able to work with him and the team on the Pisa Global Competence piece. I've also been involved with another OECD project on Education 2030. And we just had a meeting last week, a virtual meeting with persons from all around the world, when we were looking at what does Education 2030 look like now that the whole education system has been turned upside down, more or less, with this pandemic. And some key pieces emerged, which are very much aligned with what Mario shared as well, particularly the centrality of well-being. And what I heard from Mario, and if you followed that definition framework of global competence that OECD is using, that talked about collective well-being. And last week we were talking then also about individual well-being and the role of mindfulness and the role that plays within well-being, but really emphasizing that well-being piece. Second theme that emerged last week as we were discussing Education 2030 is the need to view all of this much more holistically. And that is so true for intercultural and global competence as well. That for a long time, we've often, and I've done this too with research, taken it out and looked at it as something separate. But we need to view this much more holistically, how it fits in with all of human development. And as some of my research has shown and others, that this is really a lifelong process, a journey that we are all on, and that continues. So those are some pieces that have been emerging from the Education 2030 as it impacts with our discussion on intercultural and global competence. Human connection is what really matters, and we must look for ways to foster human connection intentionally. And I invite you to think with me about ways to foster deeper human connections, particularly during this pandemic time. Beyond participating in webinars and looking at ways that we can foster these deeper connections in bridging divides. And so if you're able, I would love to have you type in some of your ideas and suggestions in the chat box now. And perhaps we can have a bit of a discussion in just a little while about more ways that we can really truly work at fostering deeper human connection, even if it needs to be virtually at this point in time. I want to end by sharing with you an exciting development happening at the global level through the United Nations, specifically Unesco. And some of you may be aware that Unesco has been piloting for over the last couple of years an intercultural methodology that works with any group of people anywhere in the world using little to no resources, and that can be facilitated by someone who may not have a formal training or background in intercultural communication. And I have had the honor to work with Unesco on this project, and we launched this methodology officially in December in Paris at Unesco headquarters. And there were a few AFSers who were there who were able to be part of that. And it's resulted in what you see here on the screen. This is an open access manual. So you can find out more about this if you go online and you see the open access there. It's available in 5 languages. And UNESCO really wants this to be used as widely as possible. The methodology has been around as long as humans have been around, and it's based on storytelling. The name of this methodology is called Story Circles. And the exciting piece is that this spring we've been looking at how we can do this virtually. AFS has been looking into how to do this virtually as well. And I'm excited to share with you that it is possible. Using Zoom breakouts, the Zoom platform, we've been able to continue story circles, and it's worked reasonably well. Of course, the preference is that it would be face-to-face. That's much more impactful, but when we can't meet face-to-face, the virtual story circles is the next best thing. So I would invite all of you, if you're interested, to give this a try. It is a way to build deeper human connection, as I was speaking about earlier. And it's a way to practice listening for understanding. So the Story Circles methodology is not just head knowledge, but it really allows us to connect deeply with others and to practice these vital aspects of intercultural competence, including that listening for understanding and empathy, as well as showing respect and hopefully building those deeper relationships. So just a note, logistically, that face-to-face, we usually advise 90 minutes to 2 hours. Online, we've been able to do this in 75 minutes. Of course, longer is better if you can manage that. If you're interested in using the story circles, please do contact me directly. You have my email address on the screen, d.deerdorf@duke.edu. And I'd love to hear from you if you are interested in using this methodology virtually or face-to-face in the future, and how that goes for you. So those are just a few comments and thoughts in looking globally and what's happening. And I look forward to hearing from all of you now, your ideas, questions, and even resources you might have. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Darla, for sharing these very hands-on thoughts and tools with us. On a similar note, before we move into the Q&A, I just want to share a little bit another example from the field from AFS's experience in what we are using in terms of tools to support students to develop and foster global competence during and post COVID-19 pandemic. And we already talked a little bit about AFS in this webinar, and many of you are here because you know AFS. But for those who are not familiar, AFS Intercultural Programs is an international voluntary nonprofit organization that has been developing global citizens and providing intercultural learning opportunities for over 100 years. Our flagship programs are long-term and school-based study abroad exchange programs for 15 to 18-year-old students, but we also work to achieve our mission through 3 impact goals. One of them by developing active global citizens to take action in their communities and around the world, by globalizing schools and institutions to deliver effective intercultural learning programs that lead to global competence, and by expanding access to intercultural education through scholarship and community outreach as well. What some of you might not know is that AFS began as a volunteer ambulance corps during World War I, as a way of providing humanitarian aid and service during a global crisis. And today, over 100 years later, we continue to promote service during a different kind of crisis. And during COVID-19 crisis, we've been supporting nearly 7,000 students across 60 countries who were abroad in their exchange programs. And we literally have been working for the past few months around the clock and globe to repatriate them or shelter in place. Very few hundreds for this 7,000 are still sheltered in place. But we also have responded quickly to ensure they had access to reentry support wherever they are in the world, for them to process this reentry experience during COVID-19, to debrief on their intercultural learning journeys, and to continue to develop global competence. And we did so in 2 ways. The first, as Darla mentioned, in AFS, we always have been very intentional about developing intercultural competence and global competence. And a key part of it has been our orientations that happen pre, during, and after the exchange programs, both with students and host families, that are delivered by our volunteers and staff that are trained in intercultural topics. Right now, because these orientations generally take place in person, they couldn't take place in person. So we developed material to make sure that these activities that are very hands-on, experiential, that they could be done online, virtually, through Zoom or whatever platform. So that was our first response, to create a framework that our volunteer and staff could use globally to do these re-entry orientations. But secondly, this really happened, the orientations on the national level. We still felt, because their programs were mainly terminated earlier, that we could offer something else for them to continue their intercultural learning journeys, as we call it, and also to connect with peers that were going through a similar process in an intentional space. We had a tool already called the Global Competence Certificate that we have been using with our 18 plus learners, adult learners, which is a blended online program. But we adapted that very quickly to create a version that would be appropriate for this age group, a separate environment in the learning management system we use, and adapting the language, not only making it more engaging for this age group with TikToks and all these things that teens really appreciate, but also making sure that the language and the trainers were prepared to deal with the specific moment that they were going through. So we have been offering this, and we had, from the 7,000 that have been repatriated, we offered this for free, of course, with the support of our national organizations. And we have nearly 7,000 learners going through the program. The last cohort is going on right now. And what has been a great learning from this experience is that they really have been appreciating this as a learning opportunity to connect with their peers from around the globe. And not only through the self-paced learning online, where they have forums, we have over 60,000 entries in the forum prompts, but also during the facilitated live sessions, when they get together in groups of 20, and guided by a facilitator, they debrief on the current experience and on their intercultural learning experience. I have been one of those facilitators, and I've been very moved. It's been very inspirational. And the third tool that we are now developing for 2020 and beyond, because we are resuming our exchange programs where possible for the second semester of this year. And this was something that was already in the plan, but that we boosted now the launch. And we'll be launching these impact-driven new AFS program experiences that really builds on our programs before and all this intentional learning, but based on a partnership with IDEO that we did on research and with the Center for Social Impact Strategy in University of Pennsylvania. We have created a program that offers them really an opportunity to dive into social impact, and part of the program will happen through an online engagement, since we've been doing to a global cohort as a 3-week blended learning program that they will complete before program departure, preparing them to really seize the potential of this experience. And they will continue to develop the skills throughout their programs, and supported, of course, by AFS volunteers and staff worldwide. Finally, these are tools we have been using for AFS students, but we have learned that bringing this expertise that we have on really experiential learning, interactive learning through a very intentional online facilitated space has been doing a great effect. We're doing research to see how is the educational impact and impact on this special group. But we are also launching tools for teams worldwide that might be of interest, also in collaboration with some of the work we are doing with the University of Pennsylvania. So we're going to have 2 versions of this that really, of course, never replace the in-person experience and immersive experience by going through an exchange program in person, but that also provide a global platform for teams to connect with teams worldwide, and also reflect, while not needing to travel abroad, about their own global competences. So one will be focused, the adventurer, and the second one, activist. One more about cultural exploration, and another one really engaging on social impact and talking about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as well, and how to tackle that in their communities. So we're going to move to the Q&A, but just before, I mentioned I was going to give you some more information about our global conference that will be happening virtually on October 22nd and 23rd. And you can request your invitation for this online event by going to conference.afs.org. And it's in partnership, as I mentioned, with OECD, and it will be featuring the global launch of the results of Pisa 2018 Global Competence Assessment. So now we move to the Q&A, and I see we have some there on the chat already. Some already answered. Mario, Darla, I'm not sure if you want to address any of the ones that you answered that already, or comment to the others to see.
I'm fine to answer the question from Saima about do we think schools actually have the capacity to cultivate the global competence of students, and if that requires a mind shift in the educational field, and do we have sufficient educators that could help to make this happen? Based on some of the research and work done, including even through the use of story circles, yes, as Mario showed, there are pedagogies, there are ways to cultivate global competence of students. So that's definitely possible. And the second part of that question, though, is really important about the educators. And I think the countries need to continue looking at teacher education and ways to really help support teacher education, and ensuring that teachers are prepared sufficiently and adequately enough to be able to incorporate this global competence dimension into their pedagogies and into their classroom. So for those of you who have opportunities to impact the teacher education piece, that becomes really important for all of us to address, including in my own country. Even schools of education in the United States still have a long ways to go to really look at how do we sufficiently and adequately address and prepare teachers for this kind of classroom. So there's a lot more that needs to happen, and OECD and others are working on this in terms of policies and at the ministry level and so on. We talked about that with the Education 2030 meeting last week about what really needs to happen to bring about this kind of revolution, if you will, this whole changing paradigm of education now that the pandemic has really kind of forced upon us more quickly than we might have expected. So I think there's hope, and there's a lot that we can do through our schooling to help impact the development of global competence in our students. Mario, anything to add to that?
Just, I know we are short on time, but we started 2-3 minutes late. So if everyone can stay on board. For those who are on Workplace, you can type your questions on the comment feature and we can answer afterwards. Mario, I was just going to ask you, for the sake of the recording, for you to read the question that you're going to answer, just so others know what you're answering to. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have several very challenging questions. One is what are my thoughts about developing and assessing global competence at both the individual and institutional levels? And my thoughts are essentially that this is feasible in terms of development. We have been speaking about pedagogies. Darla has discussed it quite the importance of transforming what teachers are capable and also willing to do. So the importance of seriously rethinking professional development so that teacher can acquire a wider set of skills, including those that are needed to address and speak about very complex things like value positions, global issues, approaches to crisis like the pandemic. There is not many teachers are prepared to do that. There is also at the policy level a big and important recognition that you cannot simply shut things out of the classroom, and cannot simply pretend that that you can isolate students from what happens outside. So there is a collective responsibility to do something to empower teachers to do more and to give the opportunities to all learners, and not just those students who are in more privileged schools and who have more opportunities to engage with this type of problems. It's we have seen with global competence at the OECD with this promoting this assessment and with the responses that we got, then there is really a lot to do to change the mindset also at the policy level with governance, with decision makers. Even those people who are really open to these kind of things still consider some issues, some subjects, some approaches as taboos, and especially conversation around values and around approaches to teachers to prevent big problems like discrimination and racism. I've got another problem on whether 21st century skills, another question on whether 21st century skills are nice to have or fun, and or schools should rather focus on mathematics and science, from Lawrence. This is the essence of my work, and my response to that question is that you can really you can only learn deeply mathematics, science, and all these subjects by developing transversal thinking and learning skills like the ability to critically evaluate the information you get, the ability to think creatively about solution, self-regulation, global competence. These do not replace a standard subject. They do not take time away, but are actually enable people to apply what they learn to their real life. And final questions on do we expect more countries to take part in the Global Competence Assessment in Pisa 2021? Unfortunately, this assessment is a one-off, and we don't have a clear, definitive plan on repeating this assessment in the future. We hope to convince people when the report comes out, with the help of great friends like AFS, that this is a worthwhile approach. As I said, it doesn't replace classroom assessment, formative assessment, portfolio type of assessment. Absolutely has a completely different purpose. It just provides a snapshot of the situation, and it's meant to open the eyes of policymakers on the importance of these things. But having trends, having measures of how things are changing would be extremely important. And so we hope to be able to do another iteration of the assessment and also to improve on both the framework and the instruments. But we really need all the voices and support and noise from people like you, people who care, in order to convince people that we need to do more and we don't have to stop the work with one single assessment. And again, sorry if I couldn't answer all the questions.
Thank you, Mario. You're answering them there, and I'm sure we can follow up via email. This is a really thought-provoking discussion. Darla, before we wrap up, any final remarks or regarding any questions that were posed?
Just to emphasize a comment from a participant about the importance of really starting locally and looking at what does it mean to love our neighbors here, right around us. And we need to start with even small daily actions, and we can make a difference in the world and hopefully begin to bridge these divides that keep occurring. And I just appreciate all the work that AFS is doing in helping in that regard as well. So each person do what they can, and we can make this world a better place. And it's needed now more than ever.
Definitely. Thank you, Darla. Thank you, Mario. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. As you can see on your screen, we really appreciate your feedback, and you can type in at the end, or you will receive via email. We're also going to share later in the week the recording and the presentation and some resources. And as Darla mentioned, our next webinar will be about addressing bias, stereotypes, and microaggressions during COVID-19 on June 10th. So please do register and join us. And we're also going to have more webinars coming up about global competence preceding the Global Conference, where we're going to, with OECD, launch the results of the Pisa Global Competence Assessment. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, everyone.